Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, how dangerous is vaping? Council member Will Jawando introduces proclamation recognizing the New York Times 1619 Project. Judicial Watch seeks Montgomery County election records alleging voter fraud. Opposition to Mark Elwich's sanctuary county policies grows as violent crimes by undocumented aliens dominate the headlines. Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former County Council member Mike Knapp, Secretary of the Maryland Republican Party, Mark Uncapher, media consultant Jerry Cave, and the former mayor of Rockville, Susan Hoffmann. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. "15 years after being introduced as a safer alternative to smoking tobacco, e-cigarettes or vaping has come under attack amidst conflicting reports concerning the dangers of the product. Mike, President Trump on Tuesday issued a ban on the sale of flavored e-cigarette products to minors because of the alleged dangers from using the products. The dangers of smoking are well known, so how dangerous is vaping, or are we overreacting?
I don't think we're overreacting. I'm going to draw from my extensive scientific background, but to say clearly we've learned a lot from the use of tobacco, and ingesting something and smoking something is significant and has significant impact on health outcomes. And I think that if we look at attracting young people to smoke or ingest something like that at an early age, only creates a level of addiction and potential health issues. And so I think the notion that we think we have people who are seeing significant health outcomes and potentially even dying as a result of that this quickly, I think certainly should give pause for consideration for everyone and whether or not we want to use that product.
Well, here's the issue. I mean, the product has been around for 15 years. Mm-hmm. It seems only in the more recent time span, last 2 or 3 years, where we've had serious health issues. That may be from misuse of the product or using the product other things other than what it was intended for. So don't you think we need to study this product a great deal?
I think we probably need to study the product a significant amount, but I'm not sure I'd necessarily keep it in the hands of people to see what else goes wrong before we actually have a better understanding of what the uses will be.
Well, but there's already a ban on the age limit already. I mean,
we know that that's not working particularly well, since we've already seen that schools are trying to figure out ways to keep people from doing it in the bathrooms. They're trying to come up with ways to make sure that they can monitor this. So clearly this has been marketed to a younger audience. So even though there's an age limit, that's not having an effect.
Okay. Mark, is the problem isolated to vaping by teenagers? I mean, Juul, the manufacturer of the largest, most recognizable product, says that it discourages sales to teenagers and has pulled their flavored products off the market. These are aftermarket products, probably.
The CDC has scaled back the number of incidents that is tracking from down to about 340 right now. They've identified, I guess, 6 deaths that are suspicious on this. It appears to involve a range of ages, so I don't think it's limited just to teenagers. I think, though, the issue, though, is the argument that it's a way of bridging out of smoking probably makes less sense as a tool for teenagers, since presumably they shouldn't be smoking yet anyway.
Well, I know personally several people who vape, and they find that it is less harmful to them than smoking cigarettes. These were heavy smokers. They were smoking at least a pack a day. So I wonder where we're going to go with this, because we know smoking tobacco is dangerous. Did you ever smoke?
Did I?
Yeah.
Is my wife watching?
Yes, your wife is going to be watching this.
Yes, but I was cured of it.
You stopped?
Dead stopped.
You ever smoke?
Yes, and I dead stopped too, because it's dangerous and it's stupid to smoke.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine the health consequences from smoking cigarettes.
It's one of the hardest things to quit doing, and they triggered and they gauged how much nicotine they would put in things to addict people, which is pretty bad. And even though it helped to build the country, especially here in Maryland and Virginia in colonial times, I think we have progressed beyond that. So less smoking is good, and vaping's just sad.
Yeah, it's very tough. All right, let's go on to our next topic. because the conservative activist group Judicial Watch, they won a big lawsuit this past week by trying to show that voter fraud was rampant in Montgomery County during the 2016 election as a federal judge ordered the state of Maryland to hand over county election records. Jerry, is this just a fishing exercise by an aggressive right-wing political group, or is there truly something at issue here?
Net's not wide enough, Casey. It's not just the fact that there may be voter fraud in this regard, but when you go to the DMV, they go, do you want to be able to vote? They don't ask if you're a legal citizen, so they're registering people to vote. The other problem you have is you have states that have a lot of illegals. The census counts them.
Let's stay here. Stay in Maryland.
Stay in Maryland.
Let's stay in Maryland. Let's stay in Montgomery County. Stay in your lane.
Maryland has a lot of illegals, and maybe not as much as other states that have electoral votes they shouldn't have from this. But yes, they should look at it. We had a Democrat who ran for office in Congress in the 1st Congressional District, and she had voted in 2 places, Maryland and Virginia. When I ran for office and I was going door to door, and I'd look on the list and I was like, wow, 3 families live in there. They don't purge anybody off of the voter rolls. They need to do that, and they need to have voter ID when people go to vote, so we know that the people voting should be voting. And I don't know why Democrats or anybody would be against knowing who's voting.
So, Mark, as you know, what's the official position of the state Republican Party on this issue of voter fraud here in Montgomery County?
Well, the issue.
Do you want to say alleged voter fraud?
Yeah. Alleged.
The issue that Judicial Watch has picked up on is that there appear to be more people registered to vote than would be
Than live in the county.
Than live in the county. Some of this, and we don't really know whether it's fraud. Certainly, I agree with Jerry on the issue of that the rolls are not purged. So people like Jerry, you could come back and vote even though, well, you shouldn't, but even though you're down in Louisiana, because the numbers aren't kept up to date.
All right, so I want to go to Susan, because Susan, so what? Even if there is voter fraud, Republicans are overwhelmingly dominated by Democrats, maybe 3-1. Who cares?
Okay.
There won't be any change.
Well, first of all, fraud, we never say so what to fraud because it's not okay. It does need to be up to date. The lists should be purged. I don't know if, so for example, my son still receives political mail.
From whom?
From candidates. So it means that he's on the list. Now, wait.
Not necessarily.
Doesn't mean, no, he's on the list from the mail house.
Right.
Whether or not he or someone else could go and vote in his name, I have no idea because we've never tried it.
Those lists aren't being generated by the Board of Election.
But what I'm saying is, I know that it may not be up to date, but I don't know for a fact, only because the mail list may be different from the registration list. But what's important is that there are people who can register at the age of 16, so that the numbers are a little skewed. It's only skewed by about 10,000 in total.
And the numbers,
that's an
about 30
important piece,
seconds.
because when we talk about fraud, that sounds like a really significant thing. And what we're talking about is potentially 10 to 15,000 people who may not have been purged from the list yet. And so the delta we're talking about here is something that should be looked at, and to Jerry's point, obviously everyone should be in favor of making sure everyone is
When you have a
right.
close primary election like we had for a county executive the last time,
Sure.
Wouldn't you want to know that the voter records are correct?
Certainly it would.
Absolutely.
But when you talk about
Casey,
650,000 voters, and you're talking about 90,000 people in that race,
Right.
and so I mean, we're a little bit apples and oranges comparison.
there's
there.
another
Mark, wrap it up.
quickly. There's
We've got to go to
another
break.
category of people who've been called to be jurors when it's been pulled from the voter list, and they respond back to the courts that they're not citizens. Now, they could have mistakenly registered to vote. We don't know whether they're voting or not.
Right.
That's something that Judicial Watch should be able to look at.
I think it's a great topic, and I agree with Susan that we should have and Jerry that we should have our voter records purged and corrected. Now on to our next topic. Over the summer, a county-sponsored committee reported that Richard Montgomery, yes, the same Richard Montgomery, the Revolutionary War hero who died at the Battle of Quebec, had married into a slave-owning family. With all the controversies surrounding the history of whether people own slaves or are racist, that was the effort that was being done as to change names of high schools and middle schools. Should we look at ourselves and decide whether or not the county should change its name? Susan?
No. County should not change its name. That's ridiculous. There's at least 2 to 3 dozen locations in the United States, throughout the United States, named for Major General Montgomery. What I'm curious about, because I did some research on this after I got, started looking into it, there's no evidence that he was a slaveholder, because he may have married into a slaveholding family. Doesn't mean he had slaves, it was his in-laws. Secondly, I'd like to see evidence that his in-laws were slaveholding families. They were in New York, and there were not plantations in New York.
Good point. Now, Mike, the students at George Washington University want to change the name of the school because George Washington owned slaves. So by extension, should we change the name of the county?
No. But I think we should make sure that we're having the right conversation. I think it's important to understand that people who are significant in the history of this country owned slaves, and there's an issue associated with that. There was an article in the Post this week that talked about how people visiting Monticello were actually concerned because now they're interjecting the notion of slavery and the role of slaves on the plantation, and what that meant for the plantation, for Thomas Jefferson, and people are frustrated to hear that. Well, the reality is it happened. It was a part of his life, it was a part of our history, and so if having places named after folks who owned slaves or may have been part of slaveholding families allows us to have that conversation and engage about race in this country, I think that's a good thing.
Mark?
We shouldn't have Soviet-style history where we use an eraser to take people out because at the moment of the politics is wrong. We should have the conversation that you're describing that looks at people in a more complete way and understands their deficiencies as well as the things that are good
Jerry,
about
lead
it.
us to the break.
My father taught me the same thing his father taught him, and I taught my son. I'm going to teach my grandson. The purpose in life is to go up, not down. Purpose in life is go forward and not dwell on things in the past. Now, nobody has an exclusivity on having been abused. Everybody has. Every ethnic group has. And nobody's had it any worse than anybody else. The purpose is let's move forward in life and not dwell on things in the past.
Well, you can challenge them at some other time
I'll murder you on it.
Because we have a hard break coming up. And when we come back from this short break, Council Member Will Jawando introduces a proclamation recognizing the New York Times 1619 Project. In opposition to Mark Alleges' sanctuary county policies grows as violent crimes by undocumented aliens dominate the headlines. So you stay tuned and come back. And welcome back. Council Member Will Jawando introduced a county council proclamation this week recognizing the New York Times 1619 Project, the year that slavery was introduced into the Americas. Mike, slavery is an immoral, pernicious practice that existed in the colonies, French, Spanish, and British, long before 1619, and we paid a terrible price because of that. What good does this do our county?
I think one of the real challenges that we face as a country is when slavery took place in the United States, we made a conscious effort to actually denigrate people of a particular color. Slavery existed for thousands of years. The reality is, though, that we never actually tried to say that these people were inferior on the basis of the color of their skin. That was a unique thing that was started in the United States. And that I think is a part that's very significant that we've got to take a look at in our history. And the notion of recognizing the 1619 Project as a way to begin to have this conversation, I think is a reasonable place to start. County council resolutions, I almost intrigued by.
There were other types of slaves besides African Americans. There were Indians, American Indians who were slaves. There were Spanish that were brought into Texas that were slaves. So it's not unique to African Americans.
It's pretty
There has been slavery everywhere. I mean, there have been white slaves, black slaves, Asian slaves, Jewish slaves. Everybody's been enslaved at some point in history. And going into all this stuff has created this, it's part of this culture we have of victimhood. Everybody's got to be a victim. And you get white people running for office and they go, oh, I'm an Indian or I'm black or I got to be more of a victim. When you and I grew up, we had a culture of victor. I got to overcome anything in mind. But going back to something that happened to your great-grandparents and creating this victimology,
you're getting off
no,
track.
it's not.
You're getting
it's
off track.
exactly
Jerry.
what this
Mark,
is a terrible thing to get
Mark.
to be dwelling on.
Well, Jerry thinks it's a terrible thing to dwell on. So the question is, when we have these types of discussion, does it advance the idea, which I think we all want, is that the races be brought together, or does it exacerbate the problem?
I think it depends how you do it, and I disagree with you, Jerry. I think it's worth looking at.
You'll catch up, don't worry.
It's worth looking at the history. I'm frustrated with the New York Times because they got the history wrong about 1619. That's not an appropriate date to talk about slavery because it did predate it. It's interesting the way slavery evolved. I'd love to talk about the history of slavery here in Montgomery County because there were slaves in Montgomery County after the Emancipation Proclamation. When Maryland voted to get rid of slavery, it was overwhelmingly voted against in Montgomery County. It was Western Maryland, Union troops, and Baltimore City that narrowly voted in 1864 to get rid of slavery in Maryland and hence in Montgomery County. Let's have a historical, accurate conversation about that, and then I think we can go forward without having the kind of categories of discussions that you're talking about.
I'm all into learning and studying the history, but making this our popular culture and giving people excuses not to do well because of something happened.
No, but that's a separate issue.
Is absurd.
That's a separate,
But when we have policies that were based on and predicated on segregation that have continued into today.
Jim Crow and all that has been gone for 50 years.
No,
Really?
it hasn't.
No, it hasn't.
Jerry,
Look at our criminal justice
Absolute
system and look at the number
Jerry.
of people we have of
No,
color
no,
who've
don't
been
say that.
incarcerated.
Give me the example.
Gentlemen, what I want to know is, does the topic being introduced by the county council advance our understanding, or the way it was presented leads to greater division? That's the issue.
I think it leads to addressing the issue and discussing the issue, and that's never a bad thing.
All right, you're going to have the last word because we're going to go to our final topic tonight. And this is a very sensitive topic for Montgomery County. The shocking headlines reported the arrest of 8 undocumented aliens in Montgomery County for violent rape and other sex crimes has fueled opposition to County Executive Mark Alleges' sanctuary county policies. Mike, today there was a protest of conservatives in Rockville demanding that the county change its sanctuary county policies. As a former member of the county council, how do you react to such vocal demonstrations?
Well, the reality was that there were 2 demonstrations today, one in opposition and one in support of, and the reality is, or not in support of, one in welcoming, making sure that people are welcome and the immigrant population is welcome in Montgomery County. I think we as a county and as a county council would look at both sides of that and try to understand where people are coming from and try to make the next best decision. The reality is that the federal government has certain policies it's trying to implement certain places at certain times, and I think unfortunately it's kind of sporadic, and we end up with somebody like Ken Cuccinelli who's trying to be the person who's now the point person for this, a person who was Attorney General that the state of Commonwealth of Virginia basically has said, please leave. I think it's questionable as to what the feds are trying to do, and I think if the feds want to try to implement their policies and manage that within the county, then that's great, then they should, but they shouldn't rely on county resources to do it.
But we have demonstrations oftentimes in Montgomery County. More often than not, they're by liberal groups. It's unusual for conservatives and mainstream people to object to the policies being done by the county. Don't you think this is that we've hit a tipping point by recognition that there is a counter protest to the policies that the county is enacting?
Oh no, and I don't agree that you don't oftentimes get disagreement from conservative and mainstream groups.
Not that come out hundreds of people in public demonstration. I got to go to Susan on this. Yeah. Susan, WJLA host Vince Colonnese alleged that the rank and file police officers and prosecutors in Montgomery County are furious at their leadership allowing this problem to exist. When you were mayor of Rockville, did you ever have to deal with a situation like this, and how would you handle these types of counter protests?
One of the most important things is making all of our residents feel safe and safe to approach police, fire, sheriffs, all of our first responders, and to feel that those individuals are there to help
But
them
Susan,
and to
the
hear me
people that
out.
were arrested were thugs
Hear me-
preying on their
I
own
know.
community.
Hear me
How
out.
safe do they feel?
Hear me out. The point, they don't feel safe with those people either. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to have a policy where people feel safe to speak up, and so they can let.
You're deflecting.
No.
You're not addressing the fact that we have a criminal element in this county.
Yes,
Mark.
we do. Wait a minute. What's your question?
Mark.
Sure, I think we need to focus on the victims of these rapes, and we need to focus on
They were
giving-
arrested,
giving-
they were tried, and they were
Actually, they haven't.
sentenced, or they will be. That's not an issue. So if you're saying that they're going to be allowed to walk off the courthouse steps and disappear into the countryside, that's not the case. So what is your question?
What do you mean it's not the case? That's the whole background
That's
of
not
the
true.
sanctuary county.
No, it is not. What's the sanctuary?
Why are you shaking your head?
Well, the reality is you're trying to project an image that the county is unsafe. The reality is, if you look over the course of the last year, crime for a county of our size is actually declining, making us one of the safest counties in the country. Doesn't mean that those 8 examples are horrible examples. And any particular crime you want to point to, that individual and that victim is certainly going to feel unsafe and certainly needs to be
Why
addressed.
isn't the county cooperating?
Okay, they
with
are cooperating. I'm
Why
gonna
isn't
answer-
the county cooperating,
Casey?
or allegedly not cooperating
Casey,
with federal officials?
My courthouse sources have told me that when somebody is about to be released, ICE is notified if the crime is civil.
Serious.
Serious.
And we have a
And
tap,
ICE
and the
is-
county
no,
executive
ICE is notified.
is tap dances.
ICE-
whenever
Somebody in the-
county
ICE is notified.
We got to
You're not letting
go
me
to break.
finish.
Oh, you're right.
ICE is
I'm not letting you
notified.
finish because
ICE
we're
is
breaking.
notified, and they're picked up.
That's not true.
Yes,
Well,
it is.
We have the county executive, when he was asked the question about what is considered a serious crime, tap danced his way into with
That's
his
a
answer.
separate issue.
And when we
That's
come
your
back,
answer.
when we come back from parting shots, or stay tuned until we come back from parting shots. Look what you've done to me, Susan. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
The number of rapes in Montgomery County from 2012 were about 102, 104, jumped last year to over 500. There's a real problem. The county also has leads. This is based on the Attorney General Brian Frosch's audit. The number has the leading number of untested rape kits in the state, over 1,000 of them. I think we should be worried about the victims, and we also, as we have a new police chief, should be having a conversation about more active policies to address this problem.
Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Mental health continues to be a significant focal point across the country, oftentimes as it relates to violence. The reality is that mental health is significant in families and individuals, and there are ways that we need to try and make sure people understand those resources. And there is a walk to fight suicide in Germantown at the Soccerplex on September 22nd from 10 to 1:30, and I'll encourage people who are interested in that issue to please participate and attend.
Thank you, Mike. Susan Hoffmann, your parting shot.
On October 12th, so it's a little farther out, the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Festival will be honoring Amy Tan at the Civic Center at Glenview Mansion, and I urge you all to come out.
Thank you, Susan. Jerry Cave, your parting shot.
We want everybody to feel safe was a common theme here today. So what we need to do, and the reason that we aren't safe in Baltimore and Detroit and in New Orleans, is because when they catch criminals, they let them out. When they catch illegals doing things, they don't prosecute them, turn them over to ICE, and get them out of the country. And perhaps if they had done that, then these 8 Hispanic girls might not have been raped. If they had raped 8 girls in Chevy Chase, the Marines would be landing in Central America on the beaches. It's not that 8 is enough, it's that 1 is too many.
Thank you, Jerry. I want to thank the panel. This has been a lively, engaged discussion tonight. These are heavy topics, and I appreciate your contributions tonight. If you would like to find out more about vaping, Monday, live between 7 and 8 p.m. here on mcmlive.org, we're going to have a live panel of experts and a live studio audience learning more about the subject. For Casey Aiken. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.